Do you believe in God?
Me?
Creator?
Yeah, so the more I look at the universe, just the less convinced I am that there is something benevolent going on. So if your concept of a creator is someone who's all powerful and all good, that's not an uncommon pairing of powers that you might ascribe to a creator. All powerful and all good. And I look at disasters that afflict Earth and life on Earth. Volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, disease, pestilence, congenital birth defects. You look at this list of ways that life is made miserable on Earth by natural causes. And I just ask, how do you deal with that? So philosophers rose up and said, if there is a God, God is either not all powerful or not all good. I have no problems if, as we probe the origins of things, we bump up into the bearded man. If that shows up, we're good to go. Okay? Not a problem. There's just no evidence of it. And this is why religions are called faiths, collectively. Because you believe something in the absence of evidence. That's what it is. That's why it's called faith. Otherwise, we would call all religions evidence. But we don't, for exactly that reason. So I'm given what everyone describes to be the properties that would be expressed by an all-powerful being in the gods that they worship. I look for that in the universe and I don't find it. So I remain unconvinced. But if you've got some good evidence, bring it, bring it, okay? And so I don't lead with that information because what I believe should be irrelevant to anyone. It's not about me. It's about the real world.
I'm talking to arguably the most popular scientist in the universe ever, Professor Neil deGrasse Tyson, whose new book, just to do a bit of media sensationalism there, Neil, his new book, To Infinity and Beyond, is out this month. It's absolutely riveting. You write about this stuff so brilliantly. You bring it all so alive. I want to go into a few things. But first of all, the key question for me with all this, especially when I was reading your book, how much do you think we know and how much do you think we don't know about what's out there?
That's a great question. And I can actually quantify that answer. So there are these things, there's dark matter you might have heard about. So dark matter is 85%, it's responsible for 85% of the gravity in the universe. And we have no idea what it is, but we can measure it. There's dark energy responsible for the accelerated expansion of the universe. We can measure that, but we don't know what's causing it. And then you add up all of these sort of what these forces are doing in the universe, it's 96% of what's driving the universe. And all the forces of nature that we know and love, gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces, life, chemistry, biology, physics, that's in 4% of the universe. So we know enough about the universe to quantify our ignorance. So we know 4% of what's going on out there. But also keep in mind that as the area of our knowledge grows, so too does the perimeter of our ignorance. And that is the very soul of science. That there are questions, people say, what questions do you want answered? Yeah, I don't think that way. I think, what question do I not even yet know to ask?
I think that's the really interesting part, is that you're probably not even thinking of the great question, right? Because there may be something
correct. I lose sleep over that, yes.
If God is all-powerful and good, why does nature itself cause so much misery? The Bible doesn't give a clear answer. In Job, God basically says, "Who are you to question me?" That's not an explanation, it's a dodge. Christians claim suffering entered the world through sin, but earthquakes existed millions of years before humans did. We can see that in the fossil record. Dinosaurs died in volcanic eruptions and asteroid impacts long before Adam and Eve were even supposed to exist. Science provides answers where religion cannot. We know genetic mutations cause birth defects, not divine punishment. Viruses like COVID-19 evolve naturally. Christian leaders claimed it was judgment, yet science gave us vaccines that saved millions of lives. If prayer truly worked, Christians wouldn't need hospitals or doctors. But history shows medical progress came from science, not scripture. Even Christian teaching contradicts itself. The Bible says God is love, 1 John 4:8. Yet the same God floods the earth, kills firstborn children in Egypt, and allows slavery. These aren't signs of a benevolent creator. They're signs of human-made mythology.
Now, I know you're an avowed atheist. How can you be so certain that there is no supernatural, godlike entity out there, given that we know so little?
Well, first, I don't count myself among the ranks of avowed atheists. And I'll give a fast example why. A friend of mine went up to fix the Hubble telescope, okay, on the space shuttle. And on my Facebook feed, I said, Godspeed to the space shuttle astronauts. And then in the comment thread, it said, I thought you were an atheist. How could you possibly say that? And so the fact that I gleefully said that and atheists complained about it, clearly I'm not an atheist. Okay?
What are you?
My favorite Broadway musical of all time is Jesus Christ Superstar, which I saw in real time in New York City. I don't know that atheists can, so I don't.
So is there a God then, Neil
keep...
deGrasse Tyson? Are we about to have breaking
I don't
news?
know.
Is there a God?
Okay, so what I will tell you is that there are a lot of unknowns in the universe, but just because there are unknowns does not mean there's a deity in the unknown. If you're going to assign a deity to that which... It doesn't mean there isn't, that's correct.
So you're more of an open mind about this, right?
Everyone should. If the unknown is the unknown. But the track record of people saying God is behind this, and then you add a little science to it and you find out, no, we can completely explain it and control it, then the history of that exercise is so rich with science discovering the unknowns that were previously ascribed to deity, like lightning bolts and weather systems. There was Poseidon, there was Zeus, just look at the history of this. I'm not given reason to say, we're gonna find something, God is gonna be at the center of that, and there'll be no science to apply. I'm gonna look for the science first, because that's how the history of this exercise.
When Neil points out that unknowns don't equal God, history is on his side. Every time religion has claimed an explanation, science later proved it false. The Bible itself shows this pattern of ignorance. In Mark 4:39, Jesus is said to calm storms with a command. But today we know storms form from temperature, pressure, and moisture. In Joshua 10:13, the sun is described as standing still in the sky, yet we know the earth rotates on its axis. Stopping that would have destroyed the planet. These aren't divine miracles. They're pre-scientific myths. Look at recent history. When COVID-19 spread, some pastors called it God's punishment. Prayer didn't stop the virus. Science did, through vaccines, masks, and global data sharing. When earthquakes devastate regions like the 2010 Haiti quake, religious leaders claimed it was caused by sin. But geophysics shows it was a rupture along the Enriquillo fault line. No God required. Philosophy backs this too. The God of the gaps argument, squeezing God into what science hasn't explained, always shrinks. Ancient Greeks thought epilepsy was demonic possession. Now we treat it with neurology. Christians once thought the Black Death was divine judgment. We know it was Yersinia pestis bacteria carried by fleas.
This is unfolded.
Now, I want to play you a clip. This is you talking to Joe Rogan about vegans.
If you want to save animals, I've never seen anyone say, save the leeches.
No, no one cares about bugs.
Save the ticks. And you can ask, if you're really into animals and don't want to kill them, if you heard that ticks were endangered, would you start a movement to protect ticks? Would you do that? And if you would, more power to you. But I'm thinking you're not.
They're not. It's the little guys they don't care about. I've had this debate with vegans. I had one last week. I have it every month. And I always point out, most vegans I know munch away on almonds and avocados, and they turn a blind eye to the fact that this causes the mass murder of billions of bees, mainly in California. They don't want to have that debate because they don't care about the little guys, Neil.
My only reaction there is that comment was addressing only vegans who are vegans because they don't want to kill animals.
Yes, no, I agree.
Other reasons to be vegan,
of course,
for health or the environment.
No, I'm talking
but
specifically
those who didn't want to kill.
The ones who run into steakhouses playing sounds of cows being slaughtered. They're the ones that munch avocados and almonds, invariably.
Yeah, and by the way, and they are dining upon the reproductive organs of plants. That's kind of weird. And I imagine if a plant-based alien visited Earth, they would freak out when they saw vegetarians.
Yes.
Because the vegetarians would be eating them, right? And vegetarians target not only the reproductive organs, the nuts, the berries, the flowers, but they also target the infant versions of it. Baby lettuce, baby carrots, baby.
Oh my God.
This would terrify a plant-based alien. So that's just a cosmic perspective on that diet.
You have given me a whole new line of attack. The flower babies. I love it. This is fantastic. I find these.
That's dangerous. If it's dangerous to feed you more lines of attack, because I don't know what you're going to do with it.
No, but I always like to take these things to their debates to their logical end, right? I mean, and it seems to me when it suits them, they care about the bigger animals, the cuddly ones. But when it comes to the little guys, they're not interested. Now, I want to talk about
the furry ones especially.
Something even more iconic, actually, than God or vegans, and it's your moustache, which has become one of the world's most famous moustaches. And here's extraordinary. There's a whole website that's been set up called deGrasse Tyson's Moustache. And we did a bit of research ourselves, a bit of scientific research. And there's a moustache montage that we have here, which is quite extraordinary. It turns out almost every brilliant scientist has had a magnificent tash. Nikola Tesla, the inventor extraordinaire, great tash. Louis de Broglie, discovered the wave-like nature of all matter, great tash. Hans Geiger, famous for the Geiger counter. Robert H. Goddard built the first liquid-fueled rocket. And, of course, Albert Einstein, probably the one nearest to your own. You've become the modern-day godfather of science moustaches, but very much running in a sort of a great, long, historic list of great tashes.
I never thought about it. This mustache, I've never shaved it in my life. Yes, I've trimmed it, but it's ever since I could grow a mustache, I've had a mustache. So it's just part of my life. And even it was kind of out of style a few years ago. And I was a little bit, I did get rid of my mutton chop sideburns. I figured, okay, that's from 1978. I could lose those. But I did keep the mustache. But if I were to vote among those mustaches, I would say, we remember Einstein as this wire-haired, gray, big, bushy eyebrows. But he was a dashing young man. You see him in a tuxedo. Yes, look at that mustache. That's like a Magnum PI mustache right there.
If you could, final question, Neil. If you could have dinner tonight with any scientist in the history of recorded mankind, who would it be?
Yeah, it would be, no question about it, Isaac Newton. But I think about that all the time, and I'd say, Isaac, come for dinner. And he'd look out the window, and he'd see these things moving. He said, what are those? And I'd say, well, they're horse-drawn carriages without a horse. He said, well, how do they move? Well, they use gasoline. What's gasoline? Oh, it's fossil fuels. What's fossil fuels? And after 5 minutes of this, I say, go back to where you came from.
Also, unfortunately, your answer...
There's so much that has happened since then.
Well, your answer is completely...
I don't know if I have the patience.
Well, you killed my theory also, because Isaac Newton famously was clean-shaven.
Oh, well, Newton, we see him with these big locks of curls, but I think that was actually a wig on top of much shorter hair. And the statue of him in Cambridge, in Trinity Church in Cambridge, you see him with short hair.
Wow.
So I was so disappointed when I heard of that, yeah.
Neil, I could honestly interview you every single day and it would never get boring. You've got a fantastic way of bringing this stuff to life. To Infinity and Beyond, a journey of cosmic discovery. Neil deGrasse Tyson and Lindsay Walker. It's a #1 New York Times bestseller, as all your books are. It's a fantastic read and great to have you back at Uncensored. Thank you.
What's striking in this final part is how Neil brings everything back to perspective. When Piers tries to bait him with vegan debates and even jokes about mustaches, Neil reminds us that science is about patterns, evidence, and progress. Look at the scientists Piers names: Tesla, Einstein, Goddard. These were men who changed the world not by praying, but by experimenting, measuring, and building. Compare that to Christianity's record. Centuries of teaching that the earth was flat or that the sun revolved around us. It was scientists, not priests, who proved otherwise. Even Neil's joke about explaining cars to Isaac Newton highlights how far human knowledge has come. Newton, brilliant as he was, didn't know about fossil fuels, evolution, or relativity. Knowledge builds, while the Bible remains frozen in contradictions written thousands of years ago. In Ecclesiastes 1:5, it says the sun rises and sets as if earth stood still, but science corrected that. Religion stays stagnant. Science keeps moving. And today, it's not religion that gives us vaccines, space exploration, or AI. It's science. That's why Neil connects with audiences. He shows that wonder doesn't require God, only curiosity. So what do you think? Should we keep relying on ancient texts, or trust the evidence that keeps pushing humanity forward? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if you agree. Science explains reality better than religion. And don't forget to subscribe for more fact-based commentary.
This isn't really an argument for God's existence. Rather, it's the claim that you can know that God exists wholly apart from arguments, simply by immediately experiencing him.
Nature of the soul, the significance of the resurrection, and so on. Bertrand Russell put it well when he considered the prospect of there being a teapot in orbit around Mars. If enough people start convincing themselves that there is a teapot in orbit around Mars, then it soon becomes an object of scholarly debate and extraordinarily difficult to disprove by logic, or more reliably by experiment.
Carried out a ministry of miracles and exorcisms. But the supreme confirmation of his claim was his resurrection from the dead. If Jesus really did rise from the dead, then it would seem that we have a divine miracle on our hands, and thus evidence for the existence of God. Now, Dr. Atkins says, I know of no evidence that the resurrection did take place. But there are actually 3 established facts recognized by the majority of New Testament historians today, which I believe are best explained by the resurrection of Jesus. Fact number 1. On the Sunday following his crucifixion, Jesus' tomb was discovered empty by a group of his women followers. According to Jakob Kramer, an Austrian scholar who has specialized in the study of the resurrection, by far most scholars hold firmly to the reliability of the biblical statements about the empty tomb. Fact number 2. On separate occasions, different individuals and groups saw appearances of Jesus alive after his death. According to the prominent New Testament critic of Vanderbilt University, Gert Ludemann, it may be taken as historically certain that the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. These appearances were witnessed not only by believers, but also by unbelievers, skeptics, and even enemies. Fact number 3. The original disciples suddenly came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus despite having every predisposition to the contrary. Luke Johnson, a New Testament scholar at Emory University, says, some sort of powerful, transformative experience is required to generate the sort of movement earliest Christianity was. N.T. Wright, an eminent British scholar, concludes, that is why, as an historian, I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him. There is no plausible, naturalistic explanation of these three facts. Therefore, it seems to me, the Christian is amply justified in believing that Jesus rose from the dead and was who he claimed to be. But that entails that God exists. Finally, number 5, the immediate experience of God. This isn't really an argument for God's existence. Rather, it's the claim that you can know that God exists wholly apart from arguments simply by immediately experiencing him. This was the way people in the Bible knew God. As Professor John Hick explains, to them, God was not an idea adopted by the mind, but an experiential reality which gave significance to their lives. Now, if this is so, then there's a danger that proofs for God could actually distract your attention from God himself. If you're sincerely seeking God, then God will make his existence evident to you. The Bible promises, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. We mustn't so concentrate on the external proofs that we fail to hear the inner voice of God speaking to our own hearts. For those who listen, God becomes an immediate reality in their lives. In conclusion, then, we've yet to see any evidence to show that God does not exist, and we have seen 5 reasons to think that God does exist. Together, these reasons constitute a powerful cumulative case for the existence of God. If Dr. Atkins wants us to believe atheism instead, then he must first tear down all 5 of the reasons that I presented, and then in their place erect a case of his own to prove that God does not exist. Unless and until he does that, I think we can conclude that theism is the more plausible worldview.
When we look at the resurrection claim critically, the evidence falls apart. The Gospels are our only sources for the empty tomb, yet they were written 40 to 70 years after the crucifixion in Greek by people who never met Jesus. Paul, the earliest Christian writer, never even mentions an empty tomb in his letters. In fact, 1 Corinthians 15, his main resurrection passage, only speaks of appearances, which fits experiences of visions, not physical encounters. Psychology explains this well. Grief-induced hallucinations are common. Studies show that up to 30% of widows report sensing or seeing their deceased spouse. Entire groups can share these experiences, like the Marian apparitions at Fatima, witnessed by thousands in 1917, or mass UFO sightings. These don't prove the supernatural. They prove how human perception works. Historically, resurrection myths weren't unique. Osiris in Egypt, Mithras in Persia, and Dionysus in Greece were all said to have died and risen. Christianity emerged in the same cultural environment, and Jewish apocalyptic expectation primed the disciples to reinterpret visions of Jesus as proof of his messiahship. Even the Bible shows contradictions. In Mark, the earliest gospel, the women flee the tomb in fear and tell no one. Mark 16:8. Matthew adds an earthquake and guards. John rewrites the story again with different characters. These are not consistent eyewitness reports, but evolving theology.
Stress that whereas the assertion of God as an explanation of anything has an air of sublime simplicity, that simplicity is an illusion. An omniscient and omnipotent being that can create a universe, some say maintain that universe, that can intrude into the universe to achieve miracles and resurrections, is no simple entity. A God is the apotheosis of complexity, not the apotheosis of simplicity. And the invocation of a God as an explanation of anything, even the warm sentimental feelings that are said to suffuse us in the presence of the Almighty, is in fact the apotheosis of laziness. It's well suited to armchair brains who prefer to indulge in adipose arguments. You're not here, I trust, because you're one of those. Now, the invocation of God as an explanation of anything is an admission of defeat and of ignorance, disguised as a pretense of understanding. I've set myself a challenge to show that everything in and of the world of the body and of the spirit can be understood without needing to invoke a God. There's no point in being an atheist, and certainly a scientist, without being rigorously intellectually honest. So I have to set myself an honest target, which is nothing less than complete explanation, nothing fudged, nothing forgotten. The atheist argument fails if in the end it turns out that the universe had to be designed. It fails if any aspect of it had to be made. It fails if it turns out that there had to be a seed the size of a pea or even the size of a proton. We atheists must not cloud the issue. That's for the religious who do it so admirably and on such a cosmic scale. The atheist argument fails if it turns out that there is a purpose for the world. The atheist argument fails if it turns out that there is an afterlife, that miracles occur, or that a God is necessary to maintain the workings of physical law. The atheist argument begins to corrode if there are aspects of the human condition that science cannot touch, such as the supreme joy of artistic creation. That, then, is the challenge. Nothing less than complete explanation. Therefore, inevitably, I have to disappoint you. Science cannot yet explain everything. It cannot yet tell us what went on at the event we call the creation. It cannot yet provide a theory or even a simulation of consciousness. It would be quite wrong of me to pretend that it could. However, what I can hope to do is to present you with a scientific view of the world, a view that makes a convincing case that science can elucidate the great questions that have for centuries been regarded as religion's own. And with your newly cleansed, deprejudiced minds, you should be able to accept that science provides a richer, more comprehensible, more reliable, more deeply satisfying account of the cosmos than the primitive pseudo-explanations peddled by well-meaning but scientifically under-informed apologists. I'll deal with the most difficult problem first, creation ex nihilo. The adipose argument is that God did it. That, of course, is the lazy man's elixir, sort of a cocktail made up of a swig of credulity and a teaspoonful of unwillingness to think. In short, it's an explanation that avoids explanation. Science has moved cautiously but steadily towards the provision of a true understanding. I will not bore you with accounts of the events after the Big Bang, which is now universally believed by scientists to be a broadly correct description of the events immediately following the creation. I want to explore whether it is conceivable that science can elucidate the events at the creation, for that is where the atheist stands on the most dangerous ground. Notice that I intend to confront issues, not evade them. Science proceeds by exposing the true simplicity that underlies perceived complexity. Scientists are hewers of simplicity from complexity. I believe that it is possible for science to formulate an account, and it will be a mathematical account, full of precision, full of logical authority, full of the testability that is such a kingly quality of science, of what went on at the Big Bang, when space-time itself and the laws of nature came into existence. Science can already show that a creator had less to do than perhaps...
The idea of an all-knowing, all-powerful being is not simple. It raises far more questions than it answers. Saying God did it explains nothing. It only shifts the mystery. For example, if the universe requires a designer, then who designed God? By definition, God would be even more complex than the universe we're trying to explain. Science, by contrast, looks for underlying simplicity. The Big Bang theory already shows that the universe can be described by natural laws, without divine intervention. Quantum cosmology suggests the universe could emerge from a quantum vacuum. Nothing, in physics, isn't empty, but a field of energy governed by testable rules. Hawking and Hartl's no-boundary proposal even models a universe without a need for a creator at all. History also shows us that invoking God has been a placeholder for ignorance. Lightning was once Zeus's anger, disease was demonic possession, and the Earth's motion was said to require angels pushing the planets. Every time science advanced, the God explanation shrank. Even in Scripture, contradictions appear when people try to make God an explanation. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 give two different creation orders, evidence of human storytelling, not divine clarity.
It's the eye. Let me present one tiny technical argument this evening. How much electric charge is there in the universe? The answer is none. We know experimentally that there is an equal amount of positive and negative charge, which if summed together gives zero charge overall. At the creation, no charge separated into opposite charges. Nothing separated into opposites. Secondly, and more potently, how much material is there in the universe? Another way to answer this question is to ask how much energy there is in the universe. For Einstein showed that mass and energy are equivalent. When the sum is done, and that involves adding together all the masses of all the protons, all the people, all the priests, all the planets, all the stars and all the galaxies, as well as the gravitational attraction between them, the answer is close to zero. I suspect that as observations are refined, the total will approach zero. There is no energy in the universe. Nothing did indeed come from nothing. Science shows that the universe is in fact a big confidence trick. There is truly nothing here. All there is a separation of opposites. Now, what that argument shows is that the event that took place at the creation is very much simpler than one might think. God, if he had to do anything, did not have to make anything. All he had to do, if he had anything to do at all, was to separate nothing into equal and opposite components. Now, that doesn't solve the problem of what went on at the creation, but it makes creation ex nihilo a far simpler process than you might have thought, for literally nothing had to be made. That argument at least diminishes God's role. Now, I could also sketch in an argument that suggests how the reorganization of nothing could take place acausally. There is, of course, no causality before the arena of space-time has been established, so it would be absurd to project backwards our familiarity with causality in our current arena and use it as an argument for God in an arena when space-time did not exist. No one knows how space-time came into being acausally, but there are hints. I would like to say what I think happened, but happily Dr. Craig has done that for me. But quite honestly, I don't think it matters what I think what went on at the creation, because it would be just pure speculation. Speculation without the rigor of mathematics and observation is as syrupy a bog as religion. All I want to leave you with is the realization that the universe is an engagingly reorganized form of nothing, and that speculative acausal events are capable of seeing it come into being without intervention. No God was needed to make the universe, or even to make it happen. My argument diminishes the role of a creator God to zero. Another potent argument produced by adipose brains in favor of a mental labor-saving God is the apparent fine-tuning of the structure of the universe as it tumbled into existence. People intent upon proving the hand of a designer bandy about amazing figures, 10 to the this, 10 to the that. We've had tens followed by imaginable number of zeros already this evening. All such calculations are sort of hocus pocus and bunkum. There is no a priori way of calculating the probability of the existence of the universe. However, I do have to admit that it gives the impression of being well designed. Had I a lazy brain, I would lie back and leave it at that and accept that design implied designer and hence a god in one of his disguises. But not having a lazy brain, I look for a simpler explanation. Several spring to mind. One possibility is that by chance the universe tumbled into being with this particular mix of fundamental constants. There's no way of calculating the probability of that, but it would, I concede, be exceedingly remote. Nevertheless, if something can happen, it could happen. Someone wins the lottery. The second possibility is that a universe can come into existence only with a particular mix of fundamental constants. Other universes, some with pi equals 42, others with bright pink electrons weighing a ton, might bubble into incipient existence but collapse again through want of stability or in some way being logically self-inconsistent. A third possibility is that there are trillions and trillions of universes, with trillions more popping up into existence as I speak. Now, I must emphasize that I most definitely do not have in mind the profligate many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which I find personally distasteful. I mean real, actual universes defining their own space-time and with a unique mix of fundamental constants. Some have pi equals 3.15, others have pi equals 3.16, ours happen to have pi equals 3.14, and bingo, it permits the emergence of life. Now, there would be some who say that a trillion universes is more demanding than a single universe with its one creator. That's logical nonsense. An unstructured, unmade, totally chaotic emergence of random universes without a God is a far, far less complex happening than a single, awesomely well-defined universe with an omnipotent creator. One is random, the other structured. Unless you can show explicitly that this random chance event cannot account for all there is, you have no right to resort to the extraordinarily complex proposition that there is a God who did it. Let me turn briefly to the purpose of the universe, which some aver exists and which, they assert, gives credence to an almighty God. It's so important to distinguish real questions that, when answered, illuminate the deep structure of the world from invented questions that elucidate only the psychology of the individual or the society that poses them. Many religious questions are of the second kind. They are windows onto the psyche of the soul, not windows onto the heart of matter. Purpose is an excellent example of the latter, ranking alongside the prospect of an afterlife, the nature of the soul, the significance of the resurrection, and so on. Bertrand Russell put it well when he considered the prospect of there being a teapot in orbit around Mars. If enough people start convincing themselves that there is a teapot in orbit around Mars, then it soon becomes an object of scholarly debate and extraordinarily difficult to disprove by logic, or more reliably by experiment.
Atkins' argument that the universe could come from nothing isn't speculation. It's rooted in physics. Experiments confirm the total electric charge of the universe equals 0. Positive and negative cancel out perfectly. On top of that, Einstein's equation E equals mc squared shows matter and energy are interchangeable. And when we add up all the mass of stars, galaxies, and people against the negative energy of gravity, the balance is close to 0. In other words, the universe may be a net nothing. No miracle required. This fits what cosmologists like Lawrence Krauss and Stephen Hawking have argued. Quantum mechanics allows particles to pop in and out of existence without cause. At the beginning, before space and time, causality itself doesn't apply. Invoking God doesn't solve the mystery. It only adds an even bigger unexplained entity. As for fine-tuning, the multiverse offers a simple answer. If countless universes exist, each with different constants, then it's no surprise that one, ours, happens to allow life. It's like winning the lottery, unlikely, but inevitable for someone. And history shows how purpose has often been invented by religions to explain the unknown, from attributing plagues to divine wrath to claiming the earth was the center of the cosmos. Each time, science replaced superstition with knowledge. Even the Bible reflects human invention. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 give conflicting creation stories, while Ecclesiastes 9:5 bluntly says, "The dead know nothing," undermining the idea of an afterlife. These contradictions highlight myth-making, not divine truth. Atkins is right. Religion explains psychology, not reality. Science gives us testable answers, while faith rests on assumptions. So here's the question. If science can explain the universe without God, why keep clinging to a supernatural answer? Comment your thoughts below. Hit like if you found this breakdown helpful, and subscribe for more deep dives into debates that shape how we see the world.
How suspicious are you of something like Christianity insofar as it does seem to answer something like existential dread? In the way that you say, look, if you don't believe in God, then it ends at death, and when you suffer, your suffering is meaningless. Whereas if you become a Christian, it fills you with meaning, it fills you with purpose, it sort of brings you sort of self-assurance that life is still worth living. And I think to myself, okay, like, is the problem of evil a response to Christianity, or is Christianity a response to the problem of
seculare is ultimately going to fail you if suffering comes along. But for a Christian, suffering comes along, meaning only grows from that eternal perspective.
Cliff and Stuart Connectly? Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Alex.
How did I do? Did I get it right?
Awesome. Nailed it.
Yeah,
First
okay.
time.
Okay, good. We're going to dive right into the deep end here. What is, if you had to summarize, the ultimate two-sentence blurb summary of what Christianity is all about? What's its main message?
That God created us to love him with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbors ourselves. At times we've done it, at times we haven't. When we don't, that's called sin, and it leads to a consequence, separation from God, death, and hell. But God loves us so much that he sent his only son, Jesus, to bleed and die on a cross to forgive us, to offer us a free gift, grace, forgiveness, and eternal life. And now, as we put our faith in him, he gives us that gift, and we begin a life with him now and for eternity.
And that gift has a lot to do with forgiveness for the sorry state that we find ourselves in. Now, what I really want to begin by digging into is, firstly, why we're in such a sorry state, whether it's our fault, and then also what it means for this Jesus figure to be coming along and forgiving us of our sins. So the way that you just described the fact that we were created for some purpose, which is to love God, but we so routinely don't do that. What's your analysis of like why that's the case? Why people are in need of this Jesus figure to come along and save us?
Well, we see it across the country right now with what I would call a revival. We might define revival differently, probably would, all three of us. But there's a God-shaped hole that every single college student I've seen truly has. And there's all of a sudden randomly this pervasive desire to fill that hole. And whether it was the wake-up call from COVID with a lot of suffering that came from there, whether it's where our culture is at right now, and just the suffocation that's going on with busyness, with technology, you name it, they are getting rattled to the point of saying, wow, I need something that really calls me into a higher standard, but I'm also in a high level of pain. That's why you see divorce rates, 54%, anxiety rates on college campuses, 60%, 90% of people say that they have immense amounts of anxiety, depression skyrocketing, obviously suicide. I've had to deal with a few suicide cases recently. And then also on college campuses, I have people come up to me all the time sobbing, saying, I was considering taking my life, or I have a family member or a friend who just did. And so there's some pain there, and they're trying to figure out what to fill it with.
There's definitely something going on. People often talk about the meaning crisis, existentialism, and I wonder how confidently you can attribute that to something like secularism or atheism, as opposed to, say, the sort of unimaginable shift in our communication with things like social media. Right? Like if I sort of analyze my daily life and think, well, if I'm feeling anxious or depressed, why is that? Is it because I haven't been to church today because I don't believe in God? Or is it because I've just scrolled through a news feed that tells me that, some country's just been bombed and has told me that my favorite celebrity has, said something they shouldn't and now they're getting cancelled and I have to decide whether to cancel my subscription to their service, and I sort of have 100 messages to respond to and emails and this kind of thing. I feel like the meaning crisis and the anxiety and the sort of the strange emptiness and shallowness of modern life is often just trivially attributed to the decline of religion. Whereas I wonder if we can really be as confident about that.
Well, according to the latest Harvard studies, we can be.
Now we're talking.
And now we're talking is right. And so one was titled, if spirituality could be put into a pill, it would save endless amounts of lives. So Harvard has done 3 different studies over the last few decades on religion and mental, physical health, and so longevity. And so the latest one was those who go to church, doesn't work with social clubs or anything of the like, church weekly, the women have a 60% higher chance of not remaining hooked on drugs. Emotional well-being skyrockets, longevity skyrockets, and those who bring their kids to church on a regular basis, those kids in their 20s have a much, much higher percentage of well-being, happiness, and flourishing. And the studies are longer than that. Like obviously altruism skyrockets for those who go to church and that sort of thing. So this is a very secular, slightly academic study that has shown this numerous times. So I think the meaning crisis, yes, it has a lot to do with church. I think you probably know Andrew Delbanco, who wrote The American Dream. He was a secularist, and he charted the history of the U.S. and showed how it wasn't too long ago when the nation really elevated God and church. And then it kind of shifted to patriotism and focusing on country and fighting for your country. So it's still something outside of yourself. But now secularism has poisoned our nation because it brings a high level of individualism and a focus on the self rather than something higher. And by doing so, that's why there's a meaning crisis, according to this sect.
Christians often claim that the so-called meaning crisis is proof people need God. But when we look at the evidence, that claim doesn't hold up. Rates of depression and anxiety have risen sharply in the past 20 years, yet in the same period, the U.S. has remained overwhelmingly Christian. Over 65% still identify that way according to Pew Research. Clearly, losing faith is not the main driver. Instead, science points to social and technological factors. A 2019 JAMA psychiatry study showed teenagers spending more than 3 hours daily on social media doubled their risk of depression. Economic stress, inequality, and constant digital overstimulation explain far more than a decline in church attendance. Even the Bible admits believers suffer just as much as non-believers. Ecclesiastes 9:2 says, "All share a common destiny, the righteous and the wicked." And if attending church automatically brought peace, we wouldn't see so many pastors caught in burnout, scandal, and even suicide. History also shows religion isn't a safeguard against despair. Medieval Europe was intensely religious, yet plagued by war, disease, and mass hysteria like the witch trials. By contrast, today's most secular nations like Denmark, Sweden, and the Netherlands consistently rank among the happiest and healthiest societies on Earth, according to the UN's World Happiness Report.
Secularist.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about secularism in the United States in particular. It's interesting hearing it framed in those terms. I mean, because one of my other thoughts on this is that something that Americans might have lost is that national identity. I've previously talked about how I watched sort of political debates from not even that long ago, maybe the 70s or 80s, and people are quoting the founding fathers like they're quoting hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, as if it like settles debates, and there seemed to be this this mythos around the founding of America and all of these stories and the almost religious art, that you see at the Declaration of Independence or Washington crossing the Delaware. And I thought to myself, well, maybe Americans are missing that as well. Maybe it's not so much the God stuff that's been tying them together this long, but that they have this kind of national story to identify with. But you would say that that's not the case.
I heard a commentator recently, again, non-Christian, say that Christian nationalism is basically being spawned out of those who are not going to church regularly. So if you increase religion, you will do away with Christian nationalism.
Interesting.
But a far, far, far right fringe would be considered Christian nationalists, and they have assumed a political identity that they've deified. And so that has formed what we would call Christian nationalism. And that's why the term evangelical has been poisoned as well. Poor Billy Graham and others would be rolling over in their graves right now because that's not what they meant it to be. So that's what happens when you put nation ahead of everything else. My point is God is the only thing that can ultimately sustain the weight of your greatest desires and your meaning.
You said secularism has poisoned our nation, your nation. Is it secularism or is it atheism? These are two different things. You can have a nation of atheists living in some kind of theocracy, right? But you could also have a nation of Christian believers living in a secular state. Do you think that would be as much of a problem? Is it the fact that they don't believe, or is it the fact that this is not sort of built into the institutions of government?
Well, I like Charles Taylor in A Secular Age when he talks about the buffered self.
Yes, yeah.
And when you look at the buffered self, you are going to have to grab on to something here and deify it. And Infinite Jest as well, David Foster Wallace talked about, if you worship, everybody worships, he says, and obviously a strong atheist. Everybody worships. If you worship something finite, it will eat you alive. If you worship something infinite, it will sustain you no matter what and give you joy and happiness. So I think secularism for me, there's many ways to define it. You probably know more than me, but one is nowism. It's like what's happening now. There's no future now. And for me, Charles Taylor would step in and say the buffered self. So there's nothing above you. And so you're going to have to find something, and it's typically yourself, to fall into to find ultimately your meaning and purpose. But if there's, again, with the buffered self, if there is no eternal perspective, if there is nothing above just death and the finite, then any meaning, purpose, and happiness that you gain here, nowism, seculare, is ultimately going to fail you if suffering comes along. But for a Christian, suffering comes along and your meaning only grows from that eternal perspective.
Yeah, there are a few things to say. I mean, first is to ask, and maybe you don't know this, but this correlation between wellness and religious practice, is this about religion or is it about Christianity? I mean, do Muslims experience the same kind of thing? I mean, as far as I know, that's also the case, right? It's something not necessarily, we haven't got there yet, about Christianity or Christ, but something about the transcendent, something about religious communities coming together, something like that. Or is it something about Christianity that gives people this well-being?
Yeah, that study was not done on mosques and other faiths. So I don't know exactly, but I do believe, based out of Dartmouth is near us, and Dartmouth did a bunch of studies showing that those who are able to look upward first and have God, and then, so like, it's basically like, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Those who are able to get outside of themselves like that, rather than fall in on themselves, which is the massive majority of Americans right now, they have that type of mental health. So I believe, basically it's conjecture. My theory would be identity. I think those who go to church frequently have a more durable identity, because it's not the more the traditional type where it's your parents determine, or your culture determines your identity. And it's not the more modern type, which is I determine my own identity. So I get that through achievement, for example. I get that through looking at my own inward desires, or I get that through, it's just because it's postmodern. It's kind of just true for me. So I think identity, and then something beyond, something like the secular version of hope, which is just blind optimism. All right, maybe not blind, but some level of optimism. Christianity gives you an eternal form of hope that gets you through things. So those would be, I think there's many categories, but those would be two that the church gives.
The idea that secularism poisons nations ignores the evidence. The most secular countries today, like Finland, Sweden, and Norway, consistently top the UN World Happiness Report and have some of the lowest levels of crime, suicide, and poverty. By contrast, heavily religious nations such as Afghanistan or Somalia score among the lowest in happiness and stability. That shows well-being isn't tied to Christianity, but to social safety nets, education, and equality. And the claim that secular people inevitably deify politics ignores that religion itself often fuels nationalism. The Crusades, the 30 Years' War, and even modern Christian nationalism in the U.S. show that religion and state power can be a toxic mix. The Bible itself has been used to justify slavery, Ephesians 6:5, and absolute obedience to rulers, Romans 13:1, which historically made it easier to sanctify nationalism, not prevent it. Alex is also right to ask whether the supposed benefits are unique to Christianity. They're not. A 2015 Pew study showed Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists also report higher well-being when engaged in community worship. The pattern isn't about truth, but about community and ritual, which can be found outside religion entirely, in civic groups, cultural traditions, or even shared hobbies.
How suspicious are you of something like Christianity insofar as it does seem to answer something like existential dread? In the way that you say, look, if you don't believe in God, then it ends at death. And when you suffer, your suffering is meaningless. Whereas if you become a Christian, it fills you with meaning, it fills you with purpose, it sort of brings you sort of self-assurance that life is still worth living. And I think to myself, okay, like, is the problem of evil a response to Christianity, or is Christianity a response to the problem of evil? Are there a bunch of people suffering, unsure of their existence? They don't know why they're here. They don't know why they suffer. They don't know why good people suffer and bad people don't. And so here's a story we can tell ourselves, which will help us overcome that. And there are two theses here. One is that that's because it's true, and this is how the world is supposed to be. And one is that, well, it's because of all of the suffering and the meaninglessness that people have created this story of Christianity to overcome it. I mean, I'm always, my suspicion of a position, it almost exactly correlates with how convenient it is, either spiritually, politically. And in this case, it seems like Christianity is like the ultimate spiritual convenience, given the world we find ourselves in. I mean, does that trouble you at all?
One of the reasons I respect Siddhartha Gautama Buddha is because he struggled through the problem of suffering. And I respect that highly. But his conclusion I find to be totally inadequate. Suffering's an illusion. Are you kidding me? No, suffering is not an illusion. Suffering is something that every single one of us is going to experience. And that is why I'm so grateful for the biblical worldview that says God created and he did a good job in Genesis chapter 1, but then the world was cursed. The world got unhinged, and suffering and chaos and evil and injustice entered the experience of humankind as a result of human rebellion against God. And then it's fascinating to watch different parts of the Bible address the issue of suffering. And one of my favorites is the book of Job. And I think one of the main points of Job is life is unfair, God is fair. Don't get the two mixed up. Life is unfair, God is fair. Don't wave your fist in God's face when you suffer, because it's not God's fault. It's the unfairness of life that is smacking the living daylights out of you. And then when you get to Christ, you see that God is a suffering God who becomes a human being, and life kicked his teeth in, no question about it. And he suffered, and then he bled and died on a cross. And I think right at that point, you're confronted by one of the most amazing things of God's character, which is his humility. He humbles himself, becomes a human being, suffers in order to provide the ultimate solution for suffering, forgiveness, and eternal life. And then when you get to the book of Revelation at the end of the Bible, you've got in Revelation 21:4, he will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order has been wiped away. Behold, all things have become new. And that is the hope that we have as followers of Christ, that Jesus will return one day. There'll be a day of judgment to heaven and a hell. We will receive new resurrection bodies to live for eternity with God in heaven. Which means if my secular atheist friend and I are standing on either sides of the bed where the little babies or young child is lying, whose body's being shredded by some weird, grotesque disease, the question is there a solution? And if my atheist secular friend is going to be honest, there is no solution. Hunk of primordial slime evolved to a higher order is falling apart. Tough luck, kid. That's just fate, destiny, chance. But a follower of Christ will walk to the other side of the bed and will hold that child's hand and seek to comfort that child. But in Jesus Christ, we have a suffering God who provides the ultimate solution for suffering and death, eternal life in heaven.
But so I feel like in so many words, you're saying the same thing as me, but concluding something different. That is like, the atheist also wants to comfort that child.
Mm-hmm.
They also want to take, but they find themselves unable to do so because they know that it is all meaningless, that it is all just molecules in motion, that suffering has no redemption or justification. And so then you say, well, hold on, if you're a believer in Christ, that problem goes away. And I go, that sounds pretty good. It almost sounds too good to be true. You see what I'm saying? Like it's so convenient. It's so brilliant at overcoming the most fundamental, deepest existential problems of humanity that it sort of garners some suspicion. I mean, what is the message of the book of Job? Like, well, who the hell are you to ask questions? Don't even go there. Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge?
But
Like
that doesn't come till later.
no, like he allows.
It's okay to ask, but then he gets shamed because he's asking too much, it seems.
Yeah. Well,
You know what I mean?
I'm interested in, well, perhaps we can do a sort of Job exegesis, but you see what I'm saying about the convenience thing, right? Because everything you've just said, where you've said, well, look, we live in a world and suffering is real. Yes, I agree. And like, as an atheist, you're going to look at that and you're going to go, this is all meaningless. Yes, I agree. And Christianity allows you to say it's not. Yes, I agree. But, like, so would a great many beliefs that I could probably invent. They wouldn't be as comprehensive or impressive as the Christian worldview, for sure. But the very fact that it serves that purpose makes me suspicious as to its, its psychological origin.
You bet. But when you love and when you are loved, it's almost too good to be true.
Yeah.
When you experience joy, real joy, that's not based on the circumstances of life, but that goes far deeper than that, it's almost too good to be true. You're right. And hope for a future that doesn't end in the grave, where there's more to us than just becoming fertilizer. Instead, we're human beings created to enjoy God for eternity, and God has put eternity in our hearts, and that's why we have this longing for eternal life. Yeah, maybe it is too good to be true. And that's why a careful study of the Gospels, I think, is so important to find out, did Jesus really rise from the dead or not?
Yeah.
Is this just a pipe dream, or is there some substance to this?
Well, perhaps we can do that. I mean, there are so many angles to take here. I don't know if there's anything more you want to say on Job before we do the resurrection stuff, because I read the book of Job. I'm fascinated by Job. And
I guess my only question, was your point that Job wasn't allowed to doubt? God didn't want to doubt? Or what was exactly your point?
He's allowed to doubt.
Yeah.
But of course, who knows what Job is really about. There's a kind of irony in Job. My old tutor, Dr. Catherine Southwood, actually thinks that Job should be read as a comedy. It's so many different interpretations. There's an irony underlying the book of Job, which is that Job never knows and never finds out why he's suffering. But we do. The reader does. We're in the knowledge. We know what's going on. We know that this is essentially God's counsel, including the accuser, this one of the earliest inclusions of this character of Satan, who is essentially challenging God and saying, like, he only worships you because you're good to him. And Satan says, okay, give me some authority over his life. Let me do some things to him. And God allows him, and so he's suffering. And we know this as the reader. And Job is left with his friends to spend most of the book just like, what went wrong? What have I done? Could it be this? Well, you must have done a sin. No, that's not right. This isn't right. Until finally God speaks back and doesn't reveal the answer, but says, like, who the hell are you to ask these questions? Who do you think you are? You know nothing about, like, how the world works or how it was put together or anything like that. And then Job immediately upon seeing this repents in dust and ashes, right? And then he sort of gets a house back and he gets a new wife and kids, right?
But wait a second, I think the solution there that God gives Job is not just shut up and don't ask questions. I think the real solution is the presence of God. God gives Job an overwhelming sense, I am with you. And I think that is where real comfort comes in this life, when we begin to grasp the fact that God is with me. No, he doesn't. You're right. He does not answer any of Job's intellectual questions, but he gives him a profound sense, Job, I am with you. And I think that is a crucial ingredient in a follower of Christ dealing with suffering. No, I ultimately don't know why my little niece died at the age of 7 in a horrible car wreck. But as I'm with my brother and we who's a transplant surgeon, he's far more intelligent than I'll ever be. No, I can't answer those questions. Why didn't the babysitter see the stop sign? Why did the babysitter go right through the stop sign and a pickup truck just at 55 miles an hour goes crashing into the car, sending my 7-year-old niece to an early grave? We don't know why, but we do know that God is with us. And to know that God is with us, that he grieves with us, and that he's not just sitting on his hands, but he's going to provide the ultimate solution, I think that helps us tremendously when it comes to comfort and dealing with this incredibly difficult problem of suffering.
But do you think that is the message of Job? I mean, if God had spoken from the whirlwind
Yes.
and said, Job, I hear you. You can't understand what's happening to you, but know that I'm here, know that I love you, then maybe, but he doesn't. He seems almost angry. He seems like, there's this one translation, it's sort of, I found this poetic translation, I wish I could remember who it was, but sort of tries to keep some of the verse of Job. And he has God say, instead of, gird up thy loins, I will question you, and you'll give me an answer, he says, stand up like a man, because I'm going to ask you some questions. Please instruct me. That's what he says. Yeah. Please instruct me. It's almost sarcastic, right? Because the feeling that you get from God here is like this terrifying rant, right? It doesn't scream love to me. It doesn't scream, hey, I'm with you, I'm holding your hand. It screams, you should almost be terrified into submission. Like Job repents in dust and ashes. He sort of falls to the floor. The image in your head is a dramatic one. It's not like Jesus healing the paralytic or something. It's not this nice Renaissance, happy, smiley image. It's this thunderstorm, this whirlwind. And so, the message I get is one of God almost feeling that you have no right to answer. And that's why I do make that criticism that it's not that he's not allowed to ask questions, but it's almost like he has no right to do so. It's like when bad things happen to you, it's not just you won't be able to understand this, but you have no right to ask questions that you couldn't hope to understand the answer.
When Christians say suffering only makes sense in their worldview, the problem is that their own texts don't actually solve it. Take Job. God allows a bet with Satan that destroys Job's family, health, and livelihood, all to prove a point. Then, instead of explaining the suffering, God responds with intimidation. Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Job 38:2. That isn't comfort, it's divine gaslighting. Even Revelation's promise that one day every tear will be wiped away. Revelation 21:4 doesn't explain why innocent children die now. It only kicks the can down the road. From a historical lens, religions across cultures have created similar, too convenient answers to suffering. Ancient Greeks explained tragedy through fate, Hindus through karma, Christians through sin. Each system reassures its followers, but none provide evidence that suffering has cosmic meaning. In fact, neuroscience shows the opposite. Human brains are wired to create patterns and stories to cope with fear and chaos. That explains why belief systems often arise where suffering is worst. Alex's suspicion is well placed. Christianity sounds persuasive not because it's true, but because it's designed to soothe existential dread. And when a worldview's strongest feature is how comforting it is, that's exactly when we should be most skeptical. So here's the question. Do we value truth even when it's uncomfortable, or do we settle for stories that feel good? Let me know your thoughts. Drop a comment, like the video, and subscribe for more deep dive debates.